Or are you asking us, or are you writing?
Yeah, I'm just asking. What
Amazon?
Amazon, yeah. And I want you to pick out of the list which one you think is the number one in the world.
Oh,
Oh, you got Walmart on there? Okay.
Procter and Gamble.
Oh.
So we got, but I think number one.
I say Cardinal Health.
What about Rubbermaid?
On what?
Cardinal Health.
Who are they?
No, Rubbermaid won't make the list. Maybe, but I doubt it. Actually, we might next year because we just bought Jarvis Corporation. He made the list 2 years ago.
What about Eli Lilly?
And see, some of these may be owned by ones that we don't know, you know.
So we got Pfizer's owned by.
Spell it right.
What is that company that's in Tennessee that produces?
So let's see. So that's good. Got any more?
Procter and Gamble.
Did you want to pick a number
No, they
one?
do,
We had Apple on ours.
Probably.
they're,
Said Apple on there.
Apple.
There's Apple. Good, yeah.
McDonald's.
McDonald's, yeah.
Home Depot.
Bush's Beans, they're in Tennessee.
Amazon.
They're up there, yeah. So now let's see, on this list that I got from Industry Week, let's see.
American Standard.
Oh, they got all everybody.
Let's go and check the ones they had. Now remember, this is their thing. They had this one, they had that one, they had that one.
What is the middle one they just did?
They had McDonald's, Home Depot, Amazon, they got Walmart. Oh, they had that Costco. And then these guys picked Amazon as number one, and that's who Industry Week picked as number one. Yeah. Now, and so it's interesting. Some of the ones that show up, like you might not have thought of, like Nestle and Pepsi Cola. I think, you know, Pepsi Cola's got all the Taco Bell and all of them. Starbucks is funny. McDonald's is on there, yeah. And then there's two of them on there I want to write down for us to remember. Nike and Cisco.
Yeah,
Yeah. Let's remember those two. They're on the top 25 list. This was for 2015 because at the end I've got a little discussion that's from 2006, and once you look at it, just remember their names. So yeah, so we got. So that was kind of fun, just something to entertain us with while we're waiting. So. Okay. So yeah, so this chapter is going to look at just supply chain management, and basically the biggest points. Well, I should always go to this slide when I'm making this talk. Yeah, the biggest points they're trying to make are there's a lot of financial gains to be made in looking at your supply chain and trying to save there as opposed to trying to increasing your sales. So I know, you know, we all work in government facilities. We're like, well, how does that relate? Well, I think it relates very directly to the thought of cutting overhead. You know, if you're thinking about, they give some examples in the chapter and in the view graphs of cutting supply chain costs and how that affects the bottom line is easier than trying to build up sales, you know, because the sales have the associated overhead and things like that. I think it's the same equivalent where if you guys are trying to bring in more contracts to build up your overhead or to build up some of your profit margin, it's probably more cost effective to save money on some of the administrative costs, overhead, and things like that. And so you'll see that in these calculations. So that's one of the things they're going to do here. And then at the end of the chapter, they've got a topic on the procure-to-pay cycle, which is trying to just kind of show you about the whole supply chain approach. And then they mention a couple of long-term supply chain trends, which I think is interesting because I've got this now, 2016, is, you know, they just made the view graphs. I've got a paper from 2011, we'll pull up, 2009, we can pull up and look at their trends. because they are different already, you know, and so I think that's an interesting contrast. And then one of the big things they look at in this chapter is the insourcing versus outsourcing. And so we'll make some calculations based on, you know, which is best. Some of the problems they work at the end of the chapter completely, in fact, I shouldn't say some, all of them, I think, are related to insourcing and outsourcing. They look at, and they build this little table to do decision, you know, analysis on your alternatives. So we'll do a couple of problems like that. That's the homework one I've asked you to work. And then they look at some financial tools for making these decisions too. And that ties into sort of like the engineering economy type approach. So we'll talk about those. So it's a nice little chapter, but mathematically it's not very hard. But it makes a few good points, I think. So let's see. So what they're trying to look at are all of the activities associated with choosing a supplier, insourcing versus outsourcing, and basically they're looking at it from not so much. They do look at it from a financial viewpoint, but they also try to consider quality and delivery and those kind of things. Show you how to simply analyze that. So I know where we're going. So let's see. So, you know, and the point they're making, and we've made this before, why is it important? Well, you know, it's becoming that way in business. You're looking at all of these companies are competing globally with their supply chain. You can get better quality products, more timely products, you know, and one of the things that's really driving that, I think down here, is your advancement in information systems. And you can see how that's critical in the supply chain world, is have good communication, quick and timely communication. And you look at some of the like the apparel industry. I noticed, let's see, there was a couple on the top 25 list. There was at least two apparel companies, and you know, that's a big one in supply chain. And we've seen where they've gotten to where they can, you know, request things within, you know, inventory is gone from the penny store, and within a day or so, the shipment is coming for the next new shirts, because, you know, there's a statistic in there. In fact, in this chapter, about companies estimate they lose 3 to 4% of sales just because they're not aware of where their inventory is. I believe it was in one of the papers I had. And so, you know, so good communication, good information systems are critical to the supply chain working. And since we've improved that so much in the last decade, you can see how business is heading this way and how supply chain has become important and critical. And just looking at the statistics, for example, I thought this was interesting. In 97 versus 2011, the cost of the materials and values of shipments in each of these segments of industry, food, chemicals, plastic, the only one that had less cost or value of the supply chain group was the computers and electronics. Everybody else, the shipments and the value of the shipments is a bigger part of the business. That's an interesting point. Even the average, what you expect if most of them are higher. So what they're going to look at a couple of metrics to decide to try to motivate you to look at the supply chain, or to look at the what I call the indirect side of things. No, I shouldn't call it indirect, but the production side of things. So they're going to look at the cost of goods sold, the inventory, the profit margin, and the return on assets. And they're going to be simple, just simple ratios. Well, I mean, these two are actually from the data. These two are simple ratios, and we'll see. Let's do an example. And if you've read the chapter, it's the Target example, and it's fairly straightforward. So they've got Target. We all know where Target is, and they've got some data from 2010, and this is in billions of dollars, which is pretty amazing, really. And they've got their sales and the cost of the goods sold, and then they've got earnings. Now, there's other numbers that go into these numbers. These are some bottom line numbers, so you can't say, well, I had this much sales and this much cost, so the difference is their earnings. They've got other things in there that they're not showing us in the example. They're just trying to give you some bottom line. Then they've got the value of the inventory and the value of their total assets. And again, they're not motivating you where, they're not showing you the whole accounting system where this came from. They're trying to make a point. So they're going to calculate those. So here's your cost of goods sold, and here's your inventory. Those were the two measures they had from the accounting system. And then now they're going to make two calculations. So one of them's the profit margin. So they're going to divide the earnings by the sales. So there they got that, express it as a percentage. And then the return on the assets, they're going to divide the earnings by the total assets. So let's see, yeah, there's the earnings again, and there's your total assets. So they've got two measures of the company's performance. What's their profit margin and what's their return on assets. So now they want to say, let's examine how we can impact this by either increasing sales or affecting the cost of these goods we sold, or affecting our inventory. Unless, you can see what's going to happen. You're messing with this, you're messing around with something like down here, especially you're messing with the denominator and you're helping things. But let's see. So the point is they're making is, if every dollar you saved in the cost of the goods is going to show up as a dollar in your profit. You didn't have to spend on buying. Now I know, again, they didn't show you how they got the profit, and then every dollar you save in the merchandising inventory is going to be the same thing. It's going to reduce your total assets by a dollar. So let's look at what happened. So here were the old numbers: your sales, your cost of goods, your pre-tax earnings, inventory and assets. And so now they said, okay, let's do a 3% improvement in the cost of our goods by negotiating a better supply chain, picking a different supplier, having lower cost supplier, whatever. So we dropped this 3%. And so 3% of the 45,000 billion was 3, but it goes straight into the earnings. It was not 3, it was 1.5, right? So it goes straight into the earnings. So because even though it's a small percentage, this is a big number fed into here. And then the same with the inventory. They're saying, okay, we're reflecting that we had a 3% savings up here. Let's say that directly goes into a 3% savings in our inventory, because the stuff in the inventory costs less. Now I know that might not exactly be linear, because it might have other things tied to the inventory. But in general, I would think it would be close to that. And so now let's recalculate those two measures: the profit margin and the inventory ratio, and let's see. Well, let's see. What did they do? Did they? Yeah, let's see. No, they don't do it on the sheet, do they? I wasn't even paying any attention. That's funny. Yeah. Well, it's in the book, right? And so that's amusing. I didn't even notice that. I'm sorry. I'm gonna pay more attention to these. That's funny. I'm gonna look them up for you. It's about to start. And when I reviewed it, I looked on the book. I'm glad this thing is working well. Yeah. So here you go. So the new numbers would be, scroll down here, there we go. Good, I've got my homework, the homework problem's got them. Yeah, so the new numbers now are the profit margin. I'll take that over. That's the one we didn't like last time, was it? There's the black. Yeah. That's funny. 1%, and the return on assets. I should actually, you know what I should do too? Well, you've got it, but I'll write this one there. So, yeah. So you can see you had a pretty large impact on those two bottom line measures just from a small savings. God, that's funny they didn't put them in there. Yeah, well, good. It's good because the examples I do, the problems at the end have got them in there. That's good. Sorry about that. Pay more attention. So you know, but cost isn't the only thing. You know, there's also quality, delivery, on-time delivery, those kind of things you want to, delivery performance and relationship, the ability to survive disruptions. And now one of the trends they're looking at is this sustainability and greenness, and you know, and also the public perception. You know how we're getting into these companies are getting in trouble for using foreign labor and that sort of thing. So there's a whole, or things like the Chinese using the lead-based paint, things like that that are having a big effect. So they got another example. Let's see, Springfield Hospital, and what they're going to do with this example, try to motivate you one of the other dimensions. And so they've got valves for their dialysis machines, what it was, dialysis machines. And so they've got two valves, a more expensive one and a less expensive one. And then there's a failure rate on each of them. So what they want to do is, well, you can evaluate this on cost just like that and say, well, that one's better, it's cheaper, 5 times cheaper. But you're missing a huge component, and that's the failure rate. And when you look at the engineering economics book that I use, that's one of the things they hammer in, that the worst thing you can do in an economics analysis is ignore a big component, which makes sense. I mean, if you ignore it, now you haven't, it may overwhelm completely these other costs. So can you assign some values to this? And the answer is yeah. So that's what they want to do. When the valve fails, you've interrupted the treatment, you might have to reschedule, you might have a medical emergency. So they've estimated the cost of a failed valve at $1,000 per incident, which is huge in my mind. And so now you can calculate, you can compare, you can say, okay, look, here's the cost of the valves. If that was just cost only, B was much easier. But now let's look at the failure rates. Very small failure rate, 50 valves times 1,000 is $100. Okay, 5% of 50 valves up here times 1,000, but the 5% versus this, that's a considerable amount, 2,500. So clearly that overwhelmed it, and now it's not hard to see how, but at least you were able to assign a numerical dollar value to it. Now where you get questioned if you brought this kind of analysis to someone, I would think would be. First, you might get questioned on these numbers, the percentage, but those are generally, I think, you're getting supply, you're getting that from your supplier, and it's well, okay, maybe I can reconfirm it, or maybe I can start collecting my own data, but maybe not, because you got two different valves, and maybe you're never using one of them. So yeah. But I think the big place you're going to get questioned on would be here. How did you estimate the cost of a failed valve? And that's going to come from your own internal data. And so, if I were to present this, this is an easy presentation. Oh, okay, pick supplier A. Again, I would encourage you, and if you're doing it even something like this similar for your capstone, do some sensitivity on this. And studies, dig in on how deeply you understand that $1,000, and depending on how well you understand it, give a range on it or something like that, or do break even. In this case, well, there's a pretty big difference, but the question you might ask yourself is, well, how low does this have to go before they're both equal? And that gives you some guidance too. I mean, clearly it has to be pretty darn low, and so you can say, yeah, I'm pretty confident that it's not, the cost of a failed valve is not that low, and so it still would point to supplier A. But at least those kind of arguments help your decision. Okay. All right, remember this little picture. Okay, so what they're trying to do is trying to say, what steps do you go through when you pick a supplier? And they're not, I don't think they're anything amazing. Wow, oh well, you look and see what are the possible opportunities. Should I look for a different supplier on this component, that component, or not? But there are some interesting thoughts on there that we'll study. And then look at the suppliers, like compare supplier A to supplier B, come up with a winner, and then and how do you come up with a winner? Well, you look at the strategies, you get a selection criteria, whether it's cost, quality, etc., or just cost, pick one, okay, and then negotiate an agreement. And I would also say, provide, feedback to your agreement, or go, no-go type decisions where you stop them, or you change, you reinvestigate the decision and stuff. But remember this little figure, because you'll see it again in a different format, but it's funny that people have thought about it the same way. So what they're gonna do over the next, let's see, about 20 of the view graphs, is they're gonna pick each of these segments and look at them one at a time and see what's involved in that. And so you can see, how would I pick a supplier? So what do they mean by assessing the opportunities? Well, they're saying, hey, look, one thing you can do is look at your purchasing data and see where you're spending money. Makes sense, am I spending it most here, here, and here? And then there's also the component of how important is this piece, subproduct or assembly or whatever, to your business. So who are we spending with? Where are they? What does it look like? And the book I think goes into several examples where they've got Pareto charts and things like that, showing you how to select. And then when you profile, you can look at different categories of suppliers, different industries. Look at what impacts the pricing, the competition, where the suppliers are located, regulatory drivers, technology changes, ones that are coming in the future, disruptive things. You want to include all the categories. And then now you've got to decide, okay, is this a make or buy? Do we insource it or outsource it? And I do think, and I think the examples show this, the case study shows it, that we'll do at the end. It's a far more than just a financial decision. Although often, if there is a component of it that's related to quality or on-time delivery, you can do like we did in the previous example and relate it to dollars and still say it's a financial decision. But you know that, and the case study is a good example. It's outsourcing a help desk, and you say, okay, you can see we've all encountered that already, where we get a help desk from India or somewhere that we weren't happy with. You see how that affects you. And so we'll look at that one too. So yeah, they list some of the advantages and disadvantages. You lose control when you outsource. And so, insourcing advantages is the control. You own the process. You can develop, your own economics of scale, but you're not as flexible. You have more of an investment in the business. And one of the things is your suppliers may offer better products. They're maybe, that's their core business. They're cutting edge and within this area, so you can see how that would matter. And then when you outsource, well, you've got a lot of flexibility, low investment, you may have improved cash flow, your products may be brand new, but hey, what if you pick a bad supplier, you've lost control? Now it's an IT issue, there's supply chain disruption, the corporate social responsibility thing we mentioned, where you don't have control over it perhaps now. And so, you get in trouble for something they do in some third world country, and you weren't even aware, or now you have to spend money and resources making yourself aware of these things. So there's trade-offs in the two. So yeah, so some of the factors that you might consider are the business environment, competition in the market, how can you monitor their performance, and then to me, one of the most important things is the relationship of the product to your core competency. And if it's part of your core competencies, you probably don't want to outsource that. I can see that. Or if you do, you want a tightly coupled arrangement. And then do some sort of cost analysis to choose the strategy, and split your costs into direct costs and indirect costs. And we've talked about this before. And so they list a set of what's direct and what's indirect. But the good thing about this slide, I did like, it lists them for insourcing and it lists them for outsourcing. And so you can see when you outsource things, some of the things you get rid of, direct labor, freight costs, administrative support, equipment for manufacturing things, utilities, building lease, fixed overhead. You get rid of a lot, but you trade off quality control, which I think would grow immensely when you're outsourcing. And then what's interesting, here and here, you look like, well, purchasing and receiving, that's a couple of guys sitting in the corner on the phone, receiving is the loading dock. But when it becomes a huge logistics problem, I think it's not, and this becomes a huge IT issue, and we see that. We see that with, us needing SAP and those kind of things. And after the view graphs, I've got a paper I want to look at that talks about 11 supply chain disasters. And if you look at them, a big percentage of the supply chain disasters are IT related. Implementing a piece of software to try to handle your inventory, your orders, track them, etc. And so I can see how, you get rid of some of these problems, but you added a bunch in an area that you may not be skilled at. And you may have to, now you're outsourcing your purchasing of certain pieces of your business. Now you're going to have to perhaps, I would think, often outsource this software to handle this, and you're losing control over that. And that may be a worse problem. So you got to think about that. I struggle with SAP. I'm like, you got it. It's like, oh man, this is, Y12 had it, the lab had it. It's you think, gosh, you get pieces of software like that are an entity of them on their own. Okay, so when you look, and the way they're dividing things up when you're looking at what you want to outsource or not, they're putting things into 4 quadrants, and the quadrants are based on how much of a piece of the business they are and how critical they are. And so the 4 quadrants that they're dividing things up, and I should draw them here. The picture's in the book, and actually in the homework, I copied the figure for you too. But so they're putting them like this, and they've got the routine here, they have the leverage here, they've got the bottleneck here, okay, and the critical here. And so what they're saying, the routine, these are things that are easy to get, and they're a small portion of the expenditures. So this would be the portion here. The leverage are readily available, but they're a larger portion of the business. And then you go this way with the other axis, which are how difficult the thing is. So this is the difficulty. I forget what they call it. The product. What do they call it? The complexity. Okay, yeah. That's the same word. Complexity. And so the bottleneck ones are ones that are complex and only a few suppliers can get you, and then critical are the ones that are completely unique and there's a very limited supply base. So what they want you to do is rank put your products into these boxes if you can, and that's going to tell you how to deal with them. Because these are, and they're given the right words. These are critical. You got to be careful in outsourcing them. These are, outsource them if you want. But since they're a smaller percentage of the business, your gains are going to be less. These are the ones, that's why they call them leverage, that you certainly want to outsource. Ones that aren't complex, there's plenty of suppliers, they're a large piece of your dollars, it's not your core competency, leverage that effect there. And so that's what they're trying to say, just trying to categorize them into how big of an impact they have on your business and how difficult or complex they are to make. All right, so let's see. And then you can have different strategies, which I do like this. If you were going to outsource, you can have one. You always think, well, we got one company we go with. Well, you don't have to do that. You can do multiple suppliers. You can do 2 suppliers if you would for the same product, and have a percentage. And if you will, let them compete. Let them compete for a percent of the business, or it gives you an alternative path if you have a disruption, or one of them fails, or one of them is not doing as well. You can switch. You can see which ones work best. Or you can do cross-sourcing where you've got different parts from different suppliers. And maybe they've got the same capability. So you're forming a relationship with multiple suppliers that have cross training, if you will, cross capabilities. And you think about mixing it all up. Now, from sometimes from our perspective, in the Y12 world, you got one supplier. That's it on many of your parts. But this is broader than just our business. It's funny. All right, so let's see. Some of the selection criteria, yeah. Can you have a long-term relationship with them? What's their capabilities in terms of the product and the management and the administration of the product? In their IT communication with you, their responsiveness, flexibility, those kind of things. Okay. And then when you select them, and they'll do a couple of examples on this, just a weighted measure. So they're going to add weights to the performance dimension, rate on each, and then calculate total score. So it's a sum of a product. We'll do a couple of. I think they got an example right away, I believe. Yeah, they do. And three of the homework, three of the example problems are that way. So yeah, let's see. Yeah, they're going to do an example right away. So it's just we've looked at this before, where it's whatever score you get in quality or cost or performance times a weight that you assign to it. Sum them all up and get a score. And remember, we've discussed the issues and problems with that. Sometimes the traps you can fall into. So let's see. So here they'll do an example, right? So they got 3 suppliers for an IC board, and so they've got different prices, different quality, and different delivery reliability. And so, again, you sometimes don't have to come up with a numerical table to pick these, right? You look at Conan, the electrician, he's cheap, but quality is terrible and the delivery is terrible, so you can almost eliminate that one without having to put weights and scores on it. Now, if there's 20 suppliers and the numbers are close, yeah, you can see that putting a numerical rating on it helps. And you also know that you influence the choice by the weights you choose. Conan can win if we weight price 98% of the thing, and each of these are 1%. And vice versa, if we rate delivery reliability 99%, the other's a 0.5%, then Aardvark's going to win. So that's to me, that's the big pitfall of these kind of analyses. You got to be careful with that. And if you do them, you got to play with them. And generally, what I like to do, if I do them, I like to circulate them amongst a broader group of people ahead of time, so that you get some feedback on your weights, or otherwise you get to present them and people will question your weights, and then it'll change your decision. You kind of want to have that, have an idea of where you're headed ahead of time. And if you do it in a group and try to reach a group consensus, and I've done that. I've actually done that on a project. And you come up with, you got the data and you got the weights, and you're trying to reach a group consensus on the weights to make a decision, so you can justify your decision. Be careful in the group if you get 2 people or 1 person that's a dominant voice, because then the weights become their weights and not the group weights, because people won't speak up. So you have to deal with how you can handle that. But nevertheless, if you've got a bunch of criteria, here we've only got 3, but if you've got 50 criteria and a lot of choices, one of the good things about that kind of approach is at least it documents your decision, it collects your data in one spot, it documents your group's thoughts on who voted for this weight and who didn't, and an average weight if that's what you wind up using. And so if you do want to come back and revisit your decision, why do we pick this supplier, what was the main thing driving us? It's a good process at least for that, to collect the data and to understand what you did, especially if in the future you recognize that your selection was driven mostly by one dimension or something, like quality or whatever, and then you find out there was a mistake, and you can say, well, in the future, let's put less emphasis on that, or let's do a better job in negotiating that part of the contract, or let's do a better job in negotiating another part of the contract. So it just helps you with that, even if, like I'm saying, you can probably pick who's the winner here just almost by looking at it. Almost best delivery, lower price. They're probably going to win unless we rate price strongly. Let's see. I think they do. Okay, so look, they've almost got equal weight between everything, and those got to add up to 1. Here's their scores. And again, I made the comment, these don't have to be linear. And remember, I showed that dentist example with the first day, and I've got it again in this chapter, just in case you want to look at it, where they're not linear. Because you may want to do that. You may want to be excellent is 20 or 30% better than good. It may be important to have almost a log scale like that on it. So, that may be really a big deal, depending on your business. So here they've assigned everybody's scores. In this case, they're not telling you how they assigned them other than, well, I say that was rated an excellent, and that rated a poor. In one of the examples in the problems I'll work at the end, that they give you a table, a tabular range. So here's your scores, and let's apply the weights and scores. Okay, yeah, and gee, it was not a surprise. Conan fell way out. These two were close. That's because they were close in performance. And so now they say, well, don't, and you may not want to run right off now and say, okay, well, Aardvark gets it because they're 10.1 better than the other guys. What you might want to come up to with a decision like this is, well, you throw Conan out. We knew we weren't going to do that anyway. And now go approach both of these. And maybe now, I think they actually talk about this in the next slide. Yeah, you could pick Aardvark just because they won, but you could say, well, try to improve your quality. But Beverly Hills is close enough. You can pick them and ask them to try to improve their delivery performance, or put a metric in your contract relative to that. Or you can give it to both of them and split the volume and see how things change, see how they do in the future, or have 2 suppliers. That reduces your risk. And so to me, that's I kind of like that approach, and that's supported by your decision since they both almost tied. And so these are good little approaches to use. These are good things, something like this, you probably wouldn't build an entire capstone on it, but these would be good front end things if you had multiple choices of paths to do or something. Good little front end analysis to do to support your direction and set yourself up. I guess that's kind of these things, Back to that. Now let's see. So we're now 2 already. So yeah. And then this is sort of the final thing. Yeah, negotiate a contract with them. And you could, if you had a request for information and quotation, if you had more suppliers that you wanted to reach out to, yeah, you can specify a brand or characteristics, performance characteristics. And you guys are probably used to that. If you're trying to buy something, just be careful. Be real careful. If you're buying things out at work, make sure your specifications don't map into a vendor you don't want. I've seen that happen several times if you're trying to buy something. If something is truly critical in your specification or characteristics, make sure you understand it, get it in there. When I was in the robotics divisions, more than once, we bought some pretty cruddy robotic arms and some pretty cruddy motors because somebody left something out of the specs, and yeah, lo and behold, the low price came in, and yeah, it met all your specs because you didn't put the critical one in there, and it did not perform at all like you wanted to. And now you've got a $250,000 paperweight that you're stuck with, or you have to redo your whole purchasing process, which, how long that takes. Sometimes if there's bids, that could be, a year-long process, and you're really in trouble. So be very careful if you do something by specification and you don't understand your specs. You better go back and fix that. Yeah. And then here, negotiating a contract. Yeah. And you've got, you may have to go back and forth. It's going to take you a while because there's performance factors, and then there's clauses, and we don't. Most of us are purchasing agents. We don't deal with that, but just recognize it's going to take a long time. Let's see, and they contrast between a fixed price and a cost-based contract. Where the price doesn't change, or whether it's tied to the cost of something or some other economic factors. Okay, so they got one view graph on the procure to pay cycle. And what it is, they're just saying, hey, this is what's happened once you've got suppliers. Hey, you're going to issue a purchase order, you're going to send it to them and expedite it, you're going to get the stuff's going to come in, whether it's a product or a service, and then you gotta have the quality inspection to make sure it meets your requirements and specs, and then pay it, and then, you know, record that you did that, and have that for the feedback in the future. I think we would all naturally do that. All right, so let's see, now they got the two trends, and then they finish up. So one of the big trends they point at now in the supply chain world is the fact that you've got this sustainability issue. In fact, I was editor on a journal on a whole issue on green manufacturing, where they're, you know, this is becoming more and more important, and it's becoming more and more a piece of people's business. You know, carbon penalties, or you know, tracking the disposal of waste and things. And so, green packaging, and often being green costs more money, but there's this society perception. You know, are you a green company? These things are becoming important, and you know, we think, God, I don't want to pay for green products, but people do, and so it's a big piece of supply chain. So I guess maybe from our perspective it might be less than where we were, but it's not going away. I think it's going to be growing broader and broader as time goes on. You know, now this is a big one for us. You know, compliance with regulations and disposal of waste and things like that. And then the last trend they said they wanted to look at was disruption. And I think Enrique was mentioning that. You know, if there's a disruption in your supply chain from whatever, whether it's a national disaster or, you know, increasingly nowadays some sort of political event or economic event, that can have a huge impact, big risk, and so it makes you more apt to want to choose multiple suppliers, or at least have a backup plan, or, you know, things like the longshoreman strike, you know, how that disrupted a lot of people's business. You think, well, yeah, it'd be nice to have had multiple ports of entry on products if you could, you know, things like that. So you got to think about that if you are in a broader business world. I think that brings us to the end of that. Yeah, okay. So the next thing they want to do is they always talk about the case study. So let's bring that one up, and then we'll take a little break. We've got time before Dr. Garcia gets here. So let me bring up Pagoda, the case study, which is over here. Yeah, I wrote it up. I copied it out of the book. It's in your book too, but I copied it just so we could point at a few things. Sorry about that. Okay, you go down. Let's make you come more. Yeah. So their case study is a very simple setup. They've got this fake company called Pagoda that does. Can't see anything, can you? How is that? What did I do? Did I just do a physical hardware issue? Or did I do one of these?
Having technical difficulties.
What's that?
Where are IT people?
Yeah.
IT people.
Help.
IT people.
Yeah. What happened to my?
Jeremy, Rocky, we're having IT difficulties.
What happened to this thing? Uh-oh. Do you know? Think about that. It's over here. Yeah. Now, see, now it's not here. It should be duplicate. Yeah. What if it's somehow? It's like it's over on the second screen, didn't he? Yeah. Okay, but now, wait a minute, now it's got two, you know what it's got? It's got two screens, doesn't it? Y'all go ahead and take a break while we figure this out. That's what it's got. I see. It does, doesn't it? It's two.
He didn't say it was wrong, as much as he said we created the difference. Basically, the cost of that $750,000, we put it into the production cost for that year. It's their solution. They assume it came out of the capital overhead. That's the.
We had it paid off in a year.
That's what you think.
Yeah. A year and a half.
Right.
But then the connections, because starts talking about accounting, bringing it up.
Yeah, it's bringing it up, yeah.
Because we said we paid off under a year.
It's funny that it did. Yeah, all I was doing was, maybe I did it.
Yeah. So we basically, by adding that cost into that year's production Mike's fault.
You know, it's the one that gives you that doesn't help me because I can't see. You can't see it. It's a little bit small.
For that, it's the cost of running. Say, we got too much credit.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but we still have to get together and go over it.
All that, the last part's not done.
There's no reason why every person should be on. I thought we would be on the intern.
So it's basically like.
Yeah, you know, it is. For me,
Well, it's hard to say
it's a
this.
display thing. But you got two, you got a screen, you got a second screen over there, you know that's what it is. Exactly, and it's what it thinks. You know, so we're over there on that screen, it doesn't exist.
Well, you don't want to load two of our classes. So if there's like 5 hard classes, you gotta take 4 hard classes. Well, my opinion is that this should at least. Finally, Krista listened to the feedback of the students. But just get it back, because you don't want somebody who's just gonna like make mistakes. But if it's not being put across, you want somebody that's flexible enough to modify like their. And see, he's on the other side of that. He's gotta certify that you're good to work as. He doesn't think that you are.
I don't either, yeah. Either that, I can just, I can do that. I try to do that,
Well, most people do a master's in this have to finish their undergrad last year.
things.
Well, it's actually.
Oh, no, I don't have that kind of ground. Oh, you got the other one, yeah. I got to put this in here.
Pretty good.
Battery to jump.
We're going to have it, yeah. We didn't some kind of regulation. Yeah. We don't even have a dime.
About what? Whether you understood? No, because those don't really seem to matter anyway.
So it's only you have to.
Exactly, yeah. Or at least
Just the
we
last
both
part,
were.
which is kind of like makes you nervous because you think, I kind of know the idea of it, but I don't really know that it's going to be this.
At least like have something.
That little gets all elementary.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, this slide.
Okay, good, yeah.
So your first one here is this guy, which is Y. Y is going to be here. CB is going to be your coefficients of CB is going to be your coefficients of your
I was trying to figure out which one to change it because it sounds
negative B is so magically stuff right here. So J is what your original.
I didn't see the same exact thing.
Because what you've done is when you do your real operations, you're not actually changing the values of your matrix. It's going to be the same. Even though you've changed the values, you've changed the size proportionally.
This is the example.
Well, like I said, I know you guys did it, because you talked about it. You talked about